There's a great school of thought around human-centered design that talks about the fact that technology and design should be built with people in mind. And at the end of the day, they should be making life or really anything easier and better for people.
So can you share a little bit about, your upbringing and background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from India originally, and I came here for grad school. And my background actually is in computer engineering. So that's what I studied for my undergrad. But I think, I've always been very interested in design. I think, just design and architecture, how you build things. And a lot of it is, now that I know more, I sort of look back on my decisions at different times of my life, and I can sort of draw that line and correlate why I took those decisions. But I think early on, getting out of high school, I think I really wanted to get into technology. I liked the idea of, building things and designing things. And I think for me at the time, I felt like that was where the cutting edge was, right? And I ended up doing computer engineering. I really liked it. Particularly, I think, so computer engineering, just to give you some background, at least in India, it's a lot more hardware than software. So it's a lot more about computer architecture and like finite state machines and all that good stuff. And I really liked sort of thinking about these things, not so much actually building the practical aspect of building machines and so on, but really the theory of, how things work, the design and architecture and all the different considerations and how you go about all those things. But I ended up not pursuing computer engineering, or at least hardware, once I graduated. And, sort of looking back on it, I feel like maybe I was a little scared because, it's such a specific field that if you're doing that, you're kind of doing that for the rest of your life. And I think that maybe scared me a little bit. So when I did my master's, it was really generic. I basically studied everything. So I kind of, I guess, took the opposite route, which is that most people start with, studying something more general and then specializing. And in my case, I was moving to a more general model later on. But I really liked it. It really worked well for me because I feel like I had a lot of the, the design principles and architecture design from my undergrad, and then I had a good solid background for how to apply that to other things. And I think in grad school also is when I came across, it's kind of weird to say that a book changes your life. It's a bit of a cliche, I guess. But I think somebody recommended the book, The Design of Everyday Things. I don't know if it was a professor or a friend or somebody, and that was really quite a, it was a big, I think, turning point in my life, because I realized that a lot of things that I would be thinking about intuitively or sort of mull over in my own mind, there was actually a whole field of study around it, and people had actually spent a lot of time thinking through why we take these decisions. And so that was really interesting for me. And I think since then, I still don't have any formal training in mind, but on my own, I feel like that's something that I'm really passionate about, and that I try to read up on and just get more familiarized with. But yeah, before that, kind of an interesting, I don't want to say interesting, but maybe non-traditional life. So I was actually born in Libya. I was born in this city called Benghazi, which unfortunately now everybody knows for horrible reasons, but it's a beautiful, amazing beach city on the Mediterranean. It's like, south of France or Italy, the weather and all of those things. And I have amazing memories from that time. My parents are both Indian. They're both professors. So they were actually teaching at a medical university there, which is why they were there when I was born. But I spent my early childhood in Libya, and also, sort of looking back, I realized how it was just this sort of ideal environment, because there were a lot of expats there, a lot of people from Southeast Asia, a lot of people from the West, because of course, there was they needed people to sort of work in the education industry, and then also obviously oil and natural gas was a big thing for them. So you had all these big oil companies. But I grew up in, I don't even know how big that place was. It was probably 5, city blocks wide. But it was just this big compound where essentially all expats used to live. And, every evening you used to have like hundreds of kids running around from literally everywhere on the planet. So it was really interesting. It was a good place to grow up. Yeah, it's unfortunate that things are so bad over there now, but I have really amazing memories from growing up there. And then I moved back to India sort of towards my late teens, did my undergrad there, and then moved here to the US for my master's. So yeah.
Where did you do your master's at?
I was at USC in LA.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. Yeah, it was amazing. I think the way that education is approached, at least in India and in the US, it's very different. So in India, it's a lot of like theoretical stuff, and it's great because you know the fundamentals by heart because you're just like on it all the time. And I think in the US, it's a lot more practical. So it's a lot more about projects and group work and building things. And so I really enjoyed it because it was kind of different from what I was used to. I had a really good time in LA. Back then, this is 2007, 2008, downtown LA, which is close to where USC is. It was not a very nice place to be. Now downtown LA is much nicer. People actually live there. Back then, nobody did. So I did. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a bit of a shock, I have to say. It's not what I was expecting when I moved to the US. I didn't anticipate, so many homeless people, and it was definitely a shock. And coming from India, that's saying something because you sort of get desensitized to a lot of this stuff there. But yeah, I think people problems are kind of the same all over, I guess.
Well, people are kind of the same all over, right?
People are kind of the same. Exactly. Yeah.
The first time I got to travel internationally, I was just so excited. Like I had just had it all built up in my head how different the world would be. And yeah, there were differences, but I was shocked by how it's the same we are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I know. Yeah.
So do you still live in LA now?
No, I'm in San Francisco. I've been here for almost 10 years.
You're going to stay around? You're not in the exodus of everyone leaving?
No. Honestly, this is much more normal now. This kind of looks and feels a little bit more like San Francisco because I moved here 10 years ago, and the last 5 years have been really intense, I think, for the city. It's just changed a lot. And it's kind of weird. Like the tech industry has always been here, but 10 years ago, things were not quite like this. And I think it's also because a lot of the companies used to be in, Silicon Valley or in Palo Alto or Santa Clara. And a lot of the newer companies tend to be more in the city, I guess, which is why we've had all these problems with, housing issues and people being in the street and stuff like that. So I feel terrible for saying this, but post-pandemic, San Francisco feels a lot more like the San Francisco that I moved to. So I don't hate it. It's fine. I love the city, by the way. So yeah, I don't foresee myself moving anywhere.
I get it too, because I grew up in a small town and it became a big town, like over the 20, because it was, like it's voted like in the top 5 beaches in the United States. And so it's a huge vacation destination. So people come down here on vacation, then that's where they want to retire, or that's where they want to go move to.
Yeah.
So, we still get the boom and burst population in season like you do when there's conferences in town, right?
Right.
And it's definitely not what it was, but sometimes at the right part of the year when like everyone's left and have gone back, it's like it feels like the smaller town that I grew up in for a little bit.
Yeah, that's so interesting how cities have their own lives almost. So the Brinqa is based in Austin, Texas, even though I've always been on the West Coast, and I think Austin is kind of going through some of those growing pains as well, which is that over the last 5 years it's just exploded, and people are moving there from all over, especially from California, which I think the locals don't really appreciate. So they're dealing with massive traffic, and it takes a while to build infrastructure. It takes a lot longer to build infrastructure than it does for people to move to places. So it's interesting. I think it's natural, I guess.
Yeah, it's not the same as building technology. Like when you have to build roads, that's like a lot of manual labor.
Yep, that takes a while.
So tell me a little bit about what Brinka does.
Sure, yeah. So Brinqa is a cyber risk management company. I've been with Brinqa for a while, and I've been in cybersecurity for a little bit longer. So kind of interesting how I ended up, I guess, at Brinqa and in cybersecurity as well. To be honest, I think it's mostly luck. It was not really something that I think I was actively pursuing. When I was in grad school, I was really interested in design. Again, I think one of my favorite courses was like compiler design, which is all about building the software that actually reads language and converts it into machine language and things like that. So I was pretty sure I was going to get into something like that. But my my only summer there in grad school, there was this opportunity for an internship at Sun Microsystems. And I was really not planning to go for that internship or trying to apply for it because one of the requirements there was that you had to know Java, and I didn't know any Java at the time. But a friend convinced me that I should go, and I ended up going, and had a really interesting interview process. They wanted me to design a traffic light, and so right up my alley. Nobody asked me to write code; it was all pseudocodes, which I loved. And at the end of the day, I go through the short lists, and for the final interview, I'm going to talk to the big boss, the head honcho, and I walk into his office, and this is my current boss, Ahmad. And there's this guy who, long hair, flip flops, wearing shorts, and I was just surprised because that was not my understanding of corporate America at all. I had interviewed at, I think, Motorola before that, and that was all suits and ties. And I walk in, and the first thing that I told him was that I don't know any Java. And he was a little amused, but then he was like, okay, well, you know other languages? And I was like, yeah, sure. He said, don't worry about it. You'll pick it up. But the company, or the team that I ended up working in, worked on this product called RBACS, which is role-based access management. So it's a part of identity and access management in cybersecurity. And I didn't know at the time that Ahmad was there because he had just his previous company that he had founded had just been acquired by Sun Microsystems. So he was there for that period where he was making sure that the company gets integrated and his team gets integrated and the product gets integrated. And he left shortly after, and he founded Brinka, and he asked me if I wanted to join. So really, Brinka, and sorry for that long rambling story.
No, it's good.
But essentially, what Brinka does in sort of in a simple way is that we help companies make sense of all their cybersecurity data. And our focus is very much on cyber risk. So how can you make sense of all this information that's coming in from your cybersecurity tools, from any of your IT programs, and how do you combine that with business information, which is really the context for how cyber IT is being used towards identifying risk and operationalizing risk, and how we take decisions around risk. So our core focus is cyber risk management, but on a technology side of things, it's really a very generic platform that's built to be able to consume and correlate and build data models from by pulling data from essentially anywhere within an organization.
That's pretty cool. Let me better understand this, but explain to me the pain point a customer has when they find you and they're like, "Oh, thank God you exist. I want to buy this."
Yeah, definitely. So we address specific areas within cybersecurity, those that tend to be more appropriate for a risk-based approach. And this could be things like vulnerability management or application security or cloud security. But typically what's happening for them is that, they have certain tools within their organization, like a vulnerability assessment tool, or, their static testing tools for the applications that they're building. And they have a lot of this information. So if you're thinking about large enterprises, we're really thinking about millions of vulnerabilities coming in at any given period of time. So it's not really possible to take actions on all of this data. They really need to be able to figure out what part of this, let's say, what 10,000 of these 1 million vulnerabilities are the ones that can potentially impact them the most and that they should be taking actions on. So we help them go from that 1 million to 10,000. But I think a big focus for us, like I said, is making sure that everything is risk-based so that those 10,000 vulnerabilities that they're now addressing, they're the ones that impact this particular organization the most. Not in a general sense, they're not the most severe vulnerabilities for the rest of the world. They are the vulnerabilities that impact this particular organization the most. And so what the way that we're doing this is by bringing in a lot of additional data points, typically a lot of business data as well, because let's say you have a server and you have a Ceph5 vulnerability on it, unless you know what that server is being used for and how it actually impacts your business, you're not really in a position to take that decision. Without that, all Ceph5s are the same, and you don't necessarily want to be fixing all Ceph5s. You want to be fixing the ones that really impact you the most.
Why don't you guys just build a tool that makes everything secure? So then we don't have to even worry about security. We just buy one tool, everything's secure, and we're done.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. But yeah, things unfortunately cannot work that way because, so the reason why we talk about risk so much is, think about risk in context of people, right? Any two individuals, the risks that apply to them, they're going to be different, regardless of how similar these two people are. It doesn't matter if they look the same, they're the same age. The risks that apply to them are really unique based on where they live, what their profession is. Are they a firefighter, a policeman, or somebody that's just, working in a cubicle, what their age is, what their medical history is. So risk is inherently a very subjective concept. The risks that apply to any individual, they're very unique to them and who they are as a person. And the same thing applies to businesses, right? So it's kind of the same thing. The risks that apply to businesses, they're really unique to what that business is, what services and products they deliver, who their customers are, what type of information they process, a lot of these different things. So it's not really possible, unfortunately, to have one solution that's going to work exactly the same for everyone. And you have a lot of great cybersecurity tools that do specific things, but they do them from a technology standpoint. Like you can have something that is going to identify or fix something on a Windows machine, right? And maybe it can do that uniformly for every single Windows machine on the planet. But without really knowing what that Windows machine means to you, it's not really possible to get the results that you want to as an organization. And I think we also, have to consider, we have to think about what cybersecurity means to organizations. I think that's a very, fundamental question that I think a lot of people sort of struggle with, and that has very real impacts on how effective an organization is in their cybersecurity efforts. Because the old way of looking at cybersecurity is that it's a part of IT. And you can see why people make that correlation. The skill sets are similar there, or at least they're adjacent skill sets. So a lot of times people sort of think that cybersecurity should be a part of IT. But that's not really a good model, because these two functions, IT and cybersecurity, they are actually in a little bit of conflict. Because for IT, the main thing that they're concerned about is uptime and availability, because their internal customers are, other functions within the organization, like sales or business or whatever the case might be. So for them, these other functions are the ones that are paying the bill for IT. So that's what they would like to focus on. They would like to make sure everything is up and running all the time, and everything is available. Whereas here's cybersecurity coming in and saying, hey, you have a problem here. You need to go fix this. And to fix this, you're going to need to take down the server. So if cybersecurity actually reports to IT, that's a problem, because that's almost like, that's why self-regulation doesn't really work in industries, right? That's why you have independent bodies that do the regulation part. So cybersecurity, essentially, the good or modern way to look at cybersecurity is that it's just another vertical within the organization. It's just like sales or marketing that's at the end of the day doing the same, trying to achieve the same goal, which is helping business deliver their services and products to their customers or grow. And in this model, cybersecurity's clients are sort of the business side of things and not the IT side of things. And this is also what can actually drive change, because now, a business, somebody that owns a part of the business that is using IT as a resource, that's, let's say, getting a server or a cloud instance from IT, now they can point to them and say that, hey, listen, I'm finding out that, this thing that you gave me, it has a lot of potential problems, and I'm putting all my data on here. You need to fix this. And then IT can come back to them and say that, okay, if you want us to fix this, it's going to take us some time. This is the cost. This is the cost that you're going to incur. It's going to be down for a while. And now, because we have all the information, we can take this decision about whether it's worth it to actually have this downtime to fix a problem. So yeah, it's a process. I think most businesses are getting a little better about how they look at it, but that's unfortunately why it's not really possible to have one solution that works for everyone, because you need a lot of different stakeholders to be involved in this process for it to actually work the way that we need it to.
And your design skills is something I was thinking about, right? You've got all those nice pictures behind you as well. And you mentioned that at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
How do you get to apply those skills to your role at Brinka?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think from the beginning, the reason why this was such an appealing job to me was, sure, part of it was that, I knew Ahmad and I'd worked for him before, and, I'd seen that he had a track record for building and taking a company to an exit. But something about the mission of the company also really resonated with me personally quite a lot. And one of the things that I sort of started thinking about a lot during grad school was also, the purpose of technology and what technology is and what it should be. And when you start reading about design, there's a lot of there's a great school of thought around human-centered design that talks about the fact that technology and design should be built with people in mind, and at the end of the day, they should be making life or really anything easier and better for people, which is not necessarily what technology in general is doing right now. I think right now it's sort of making things more complicated. It's more focused on putting things in front of people to consume, as opposed to solving problems that they need to address. So when I came to know about what they were trying to do with Brinka, which is it easier for people to make sense of cybersecurity and make it easier for people to take decisions about it, I felt really connected to it. And I started off working at Brinka on the engineering side of things. So I was a senior engineer for a couple of years. But I fairly quickly transitioned into product management because I felt like that is where I had the most potential to sort of, apply my passion for design and be able to focus on the bigger picture and how we need to approach what we're building from sort of this approach, this idea of putting people in front and center and really building our tools around the audience that we're trying to address. And yeah, I think, the really amazing thing with such early stage startups, which is what it was when I joined in 2011, is that there's more work to be done than there are resources. So if you have a natural inclination for something and you want to do it, nobody's really going to stop you as long as you're doing whatever else you're supposed to. So I just started picking up more and more product management stuff because I really enjoyed it. And then eventually I moved into it full time. And now I also run marketing. And that's kind of how so I would say my design focus, or, my passion for design, I try to inject it in everything that I do, whether it's building a process, building a program for marketing, or building, the way that we get feedback from our customers. I try to make that a part of everything that I do. And there's actually, I don't know exactly if I remember the line exactly from the book, but it talks about how, every artificial thing is designed. So if it doesn't automatically occur in nature, someone is designing it. Now, it could be something material like a chair or a table, or it could be, something intangible like a process or a plan. It could be anything. So I think design thinking it's amazing because you can apply it to pretty much everything in your life. And as much as I can, I try to apply it to whatever I'm working on. Right now at Brinka, that is a bit more about, product positioning and how we talk about our products and what we do, as well as, building data-centric programs for marketing and things like that.
Can you give me an idea of the size of Brinka?
Yeah, sure. So I think we're around 70 people right now. We are headquartered in Austin, but we are pretty remote. We've always been very remote. So I've always been here on the West Coast or LA for a few years, and then here in the Bay Area. Ahmad, our CEO, he's also in the Bay Area. He's in Palo Alto, and we've had an engineering team in Argentina pretty much since the beginning. We've had people on the East Coast, specifically in New York, because a lot of our early customers were, financial services industry. They're sort of the leading edge for cybersecurity and definitely cyber risk. And we also have an office more recently that we opened in India. So we're pretty remote and distributed. I think that's a big part of our DNA. So yeah, I think it's built to better handle, I guess, situations like COVID, where it hasn't impacted us as badly. The one thing that it has really impacted us is that, because we're so distributed and we've always had people everywhere, one amazing thing that we used to do every year towards the end of the year, we would have a holiday party that was in one particular city where usually nobody lived, and everybody would travel there, and we haven't been able to do that since last year, obviously. So that really sucks. But yeah, around 70 people, a lot of growth, I think, over the last couple of years. The last 2 to 3 years, I think we're growing in terms of headcount pretty much at 100% rate. So much smaller. We were much smaller, I would say, about 3 years ago.
A few years ago, I looked up a population growth graph to really understand like how many humans there are and how the rate at which it's pretty crazy how we multiply. And that's why I wasn't surprised when I heard Elon Musk complaining about like how much we spend on space travel versus how much we spend on like beauty care products. He's like, we spend like 1% of that on space travel and exploration. I'm like, yeah, it's because we're busy here doing the beauty thing. But yeah, the question that I have for you, to be specific, was like, as the population grows, this is kind of just a fun question. Do you think that we're going to go more into like other planets, or do you think that we'll build these like low Earth orbit, giant like cities just orbiting near Earth?
I think the latter makes more sense. I think in terms of technological capabilities, I think we're a lot closer to that than what it would take to, let's say, go terraform a planet, right? And finding a habitable planet is not probably very likely, at least in our lifetimes. If we find one, it's going to be really far away. It's going to take a lot of time to get to it. I don't know if are you familiar with The Expanse, which is like a series of books, and yeah. So I mean, that is, I don't want to say it's hyper real, but it's quite real. Like the things that they talk about in that show, whether it's like geopolitics or even the fact that it takes, like in old school sci-fi, it's like, oh, something is happening light years away and you can see it on a screen. No, it takes time for light to travel. So it doesn't really work that way. But that's a really interesting show. And I think they have a lot of these similar concepts where, Mars is trying to terraform, but terraforming would take generations to develop the capabilities that you need to do that. So I think the near Earth orbit stuff, I think that's a lot more likely. Or we learn to live under the water or learn to breathe underwater or something. That we have a lot of water. If we could figure that out, that would be cool.
Yeah, increase in shark attacks though.
Yeah, I know. You have to build domes though.
Okay, domes underwater. All right, there we go. No, you're right. I'm actually looking forward, and we'll get back on topic in a minute, but I'm actually looking forward to how fast the like biologics, I guess, for lack of a better term, is what they're able to do with cells and like printing them and making, artificial limbs and programming all of this stuff. I think, I had this one person on that was from like a really large company, and I asked her like, how long until we have like the technology where you could like give me wings, like I could install wings on me, and they would, because they do stuff like that. They'll like grow a artificial heart like off of a pig or something off of its back. I'm like, it's crazy stuff, right? Yeah. And she said no comment. And I was like, what? I was like, what? That means somebody in your mega org has like thought about that before.
Yeah. If you wanted me to drop that, that's like the worst thing you could have said.
Yeah, I know. Or she just gave me a Christmas present. Like she's like, I know if I say no comment here, he's gonna get real excited.
Yeah, there you go. I think we could chat about this for forever. I think we do want to get back a little bit on topic, so that's fine.
Yeah, we got to show Brinka some love. Let's do a call to action right now. Let's bring it back with that. So what's your lead magnet? How do you get people to warm up to your brand?
So yeah, the way that we built the company, it was definitely very much focused on technology and product. And that's a really good thing to build a great product. But at the same time, it's not that good for marketing and sales and things like that. And I just told you that my background and I run product as well as, have marketing responsibilities. So a lot of our growth and demand gen, it's all organic. So, it's really people finding us based on, content that we're putting out and or webinars or things like that, or word of mouth, hearing it from other customers. So yeah, I think, definitely come to the website and check out what we do for sure, because I am sure that, we are addressing a problem that almost everybody has. And while our focus is still very specific, which is, cybersecurity and cyber risk management and vulnerability management and application security, I think the applications for the technology are really what, we are really excited about, because we have chosen to address these problems because we have some background in it. But the problems that the platform and the technology can address on its own, I mean, it's absolutely limitless. It's essentially a mechanism where you can put all kinds of data and do really complex calculations on it for really any type of problem. Specifically because with cybersecurity, data management and automation is like a huge problem. And to take these decisions, you have to have the information. It's like, we talk about this term called knowledge graph. Are you familiar with it at all?
Like the database?
Yeah, the
like a
data
graph database.
Yes. So the graph database is one thing, which is the actual database, but a knowledge graph is more of a conceptual model for how you build data on it. And that's kind of what we do. So we're essentially a knowledge graph for cybersecurity. We came to sort of this. It's not like we came up with the idea. I think Google search is basically the first technology that built a knowledge graph, and they're the ones that I think came up with the term. Now it's adopted by everything from Facebook to LinkedIn and all of that. But it's a really powerful tool for essentially building knowledge, and it's kind of an odd thing to say, but there's a huge difference between data and knowledge, right? So from data, you have to go to information, which is really making sense of this data. And then from information, you have to go to knowledge, where you're actually coming up with new insights based on this information that you're capturing. So it's a very wide application of a technology, and really being focused on cybersecurity. We definitely want people to come up with more use cases for what they can do. It's super common for us because we build the data architecture, which is the knowledge graph, but we still need to consume data from other cybersecurity tools and programs. So we have this ever-growing library of connectors or integrations. It's currently like at 150. But most of those integration requests are things that are coming from our customers or from our prospects. So they're the ones that are saying that, hey, there's this tool that has this great information that we would like you to bring into this knowledge graph so we can take actions on it. So the more eyes that we can get on what we're doing, I think it helps us grow the ecosystem, and it helps us grow the scope of what we're doing as well.
Yeah, I just looked it up real quick. The Neo4j was like a knowledge graph database.
Well, so Neo4j is a graph database. So it's basically a graph database, and a knowledge graph is a little bit more defined than that, because a graph database is really just a way of collecting information in a graph. And graphs are amazing things because they are super simple at the same as well as super complex at the same time. Because at its lowest level, all a graph is, it's a node and an edge connecting various nodes. But you can add infinite amounts of data on it. You can add infinite amounts of data on the edges, which are sort of the relationship aspect, as well as on the node. And by changing this information or changing the context, you can add a ton of information on this. Knowledge graphs are a little bit different. So for a data architecture or data structure to be a knowledge graph, it has to have four characteristics that it has to meet. The first one is that it has to be an actual graph. So that is a given, that underlying whatever your business data model is, at the end of the day, the base data model has to be a graph. The second thing is that it has to be semantic, which is that it has to have an ontology. It's not a data lake, it's not a data store, it's not a key store where we're just putting information. Any information that goes into a knowledge graph, it has structure. So we are establishing structure and relationships on that information as it's going into the knowledge graph. The third thing is that it actually generates new knowledge. So again, it's not just a way to store information. You have to have some computational aspects on it that are coming up with new data or new information based on all the data that you're collecting. And the final thing is that it has to be alive. So it's an alive mechanism, which means that tomorrow, let's say today, I'm representing my neighborhood, and I'm keeping track of stores and apartments and people. And tomorrow, if I want to add additional information on it that is not currently represented, I should be able to do that. And that aspect is really key as well, because, especially when we talk about cybersecurity, which works off of IT, these things are constantly changing, right? Like 10 years ago, nobody really thought about, or I don't know if it was a thing or not. It was definitely not common, but cloud infrastructure and cloud apps were not really a thing 10 years ago. I mean, people were doing other forms of virtualization, but it was mostly in their own data centers and things like that. But technology changes so quickly, and enterprises have changed a little bit in this regard, because I think 10 or 15 years ago, they used to be much more closed systems where the things that they would allow people to use were very restrictive. You couldn't really bring in your own phone, for instance, like you had to use the phone that they were giving you. But now that's not really the case. Now they have to make all technology available for their people to use, because it's a big competitive advantage. And if you don't, then you're kind of falling behind. Like if you're this odd company that's like, no, we need to have everything in our data center, we're not going to use cloud infrastructure, it's a disadvantage. And I mean, for some companies, maybe that's, you have to do that because you have some really sensitive information. But at the same time, you absolutely have to be evaluating any new technology to see if you can use it. Because it's an absolute competitive advantage.
Do people ever call you like a Google Analytics for security data?
People have called us Google Search or Facebook. We've been called those things. But yeah, I mean, we try to stay away from comparisons because, like I said, I don't think we even know the full potential of what this thing can do yet. And it's kind of hard, right? So when we initially started, or in the early days of the company, we built this amazing platform that was super dynamic, that we really wanted to do a lot with. It was not yet a graph database yet. This is still early days. And we put a lot of effort into making that platform super dynamic. And we thought of everything that a company might need to be able to use. And it worked for I want to say maybe 1 or 2 years, it worked well. But we started seeing that, anytime somebody wanted to bring in some additional data that we hadn't thought about, it was a challenge. We would have to go back and sort of code it in and then bring it back. And I think the turning point for us was that we came across this prospect. I don't even know if they ended up becoming a customer, but it was a public university, which was, extremely underfunded in terms of their cybersecurity resources. And the person that was responsible for network security, which is what they were looking to solve with Brinka, was also responsible for the physical security of their campuses. And one of the things that he wanted to keep track of was fire extinguishers, because fire extinguishers get inspected every so frequently. So they wanted to keep track of fire extinguishers and see that everything is being inspected, or when they need to make replacements. And we had thought of everything that we could think about from an IT infrastructure standpoint, but we hadn't thought about fire extinguishers. And that was a big turning point for us, because before that we were still on a relational database, and we had to take some hard decisions because it was a big change to our technology. But we were like, you know what, let's bite the bullet and let's do this right, because there isn't really a binary state here. Either we allow people to do everything and bring in all the data, or it's not, or you're always playing catch up because you're working off some assumptions and base models. So yes, Google Analytics, we've been compared to that, but in truth, it's a lot more complex than that, because Google Analytics and a lot of other similar tools like SIM tools, if you're familiar with them, that process logs coming out of machine data, they're really good and they're really built for processing very large volumes of data, but they don't necessarily have a lot of depth, which means that you can't really build very complex data models for them. You can do quick calculations and you can look for quick things that you want to see, and you can build reports and dashboards on it, but you can't really build complex data models with a lot of entities that have a lot of relationships between them, that have different contexts at different periods of time, which is a lot of what we do. So yes, the presentation in the form of analytics and reports and metrics is a big part of it, but the computation that we're doing, I think that's really where the real value lies, in the fact that we're able to, build data models for really complex problems, which, most cybersecurity problems are fairly complex.
So who's the person in the organization that would be using Brinka?
So that's a good question. And I think I totally got sidetracked because I was answering a different question of yours, which was, what was the question? Sorry. I keep getting sidetracked here, but
dude, this is just the whole conversation. There's no sidetrack. No one, I can't tell that you're sidetracked. I'm just like, oh, that's smart.
Right.
And I'm learning. I'm sitting here like taking notes and learning. I'm like, this guy's brilliant.
Right. So thank you so much. But yeah, so the end of that long story was that, in our early days, we tried to sell the platform, and we realized that it's difficult to sell a platform. As amazing as a tool it is, if you're expecting people to figure out what to do with it, it's a pretty wide gap that you're expecting them to cross on their own, especially if they have a problem that they're looking to solve immediately. And so we sort of not necessarily pivoted. I think the platform is still where 80% of our development effort goes. But now we actually sell applications to problems that people are looking to solve. And this would be something like vulnerability management. And this, I guess, ties into your current question as well, in terms of who the audience is or who's actually buying this. So the answer to that is that it depends. It depends on what problem they're looking to solve. So for instance, if it's network security, vulnerability management, it's usually the vulnerability management team. There's usually a cybersecurity function that's doing vulnerability management, that is telling IT what they need to fix and why they need to fix it and how they need to fix it and how much time they have and things like that. So a lot of times it's a vulnerability management tool. Another application of our platform is AppSec, so application security, which, as you probably know, is constantly in flux with DevSecOps. Who owns application security is also changing. It's moving more towards the development teams, which is actually really cool. So a lot of times the people that are acquiring our solution is also sort of the DevSecOps function. And then, it really depends on the application that they're using our platform for. Cloud and container security is another out-of-the-box application for us. And there's usually a team in SecOps that is taking care of that type of stuff. Asset management is a big use case because it's a huge problem for most organizations. They don't really know what technology assets they have. It's a mess because different parts of the asset management problem is being managed by different people. And again, it's the same thing. How do you bring that all together? So the who is buying the tool really depends on what problem they're looking to solve with the tool. I think people that it really resonates with the most, though, are cybersecurity architects. It takes a little while for our product within a customer's organization to get to the cybersecurity architect, because usually, like I said, someone is buying it to solve a very specific problem. But then as the tool gets used and it gets circulated, it comes to the cybersecurity architect who's like, what? I can put all kinds of data in this. I can analyze anything. And that's where things become really exciting for us. And I think eventually that's who is going to be the perfect target audience for us. But right now, it really varies based on what the main problem for an organization is. And, because we also talk about risk so much, it's a good entry point for various cybersecurity executives. There's usually somebody from the CISO's office who needs to keep track of risk, because again, risk is a function that really needs to interact with other functions besides just IT and cybersecurity.
It looks like you're doing well. You guys are growing. You've got a cool product. Your website and brand look good. I'm super pumped up.
Yeah. The website is going to change. Actually, that's an older website. If you're interested, I can send you guys a link to the one that's in dev. It's much cooler, I promise you. Or you can check back in like a month.
Dude, that's exciting. Yeah, I'm actually, when in the prep call, they mentioned that you really like design, and that's something that I talk about a lot. Like, I don't do design. I mean, I can, but I don't consider myself a designer, because I see like the great designers that I follow on Dribbble. I'm like, those people, they're designers. I'm just a fan. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you any particular kind of design, or just everything in general?
I typically appreciate aesthetics that cause an emotional reaction within me. So I could see a car and like feel good just based off of the lines of the car, and like maybe the lines of it will stand out, or I'll see some art. Typically like paintings don't do much for me, but yeah, like I don't like ooh and ah through a museum, but sometimes I just notice this like beauty in nature, like symmetry really gets me. And I don't know, I found myself, it's like not that I'm doing it, it's like I'm watching myself kind of. Sometimes I get caught up in these moments where I'm like, oh, that's really beautiful, and I don't know why. And so maybe as a designer in like a past life or something.
Yeah. Or in the current one. Are you familiar with the design of everyday things? Or there's actually the author, his name is Donald Norman. He's amazing. He's written a lot of books around this idea. In fact, one of them I think is called Emotional Design. It is, if you haven't read it, you must. It is necessary. It is fantastic, because he talks about, the psychology of things, the psychology of ideas, and how human beings process information and how we take actions on it. It is fantastic. That's the book that I was telling you changed my life, I think. That might be a bit of a stretch, but I think it definitely helped me verbalize a lot of things that I think I was thinking about. And I'm guessing that based on what you're describing about your emotional reactions to certain things, I think you probably will. Not probably. I think you'll definitely find it very interesting. And the edition that I read in back in grad school was actually, I think he wrote the book in the 80s. So all the examples for everything they were obsolete. The things that he was talking about, they were just so old. But even then, like, it was super connected with it. And I think there's a newer version of the book that came out, newer edition that came out in 2013, which is a lot more recent, which probably is already obsolete now, but at least it talks about UX and UI and actually software and graphic design and things like that as well.
Yes, I actually just ordered it. I clicked it up. It was right there. Awesome. That's the beauty of Amazon. Just one click.
That is true.
Yeah. Here's what I do.
Regret it.
I order the book on Audible, and then I order the physical copy, and I keep the physical copy around because every time I see the cover, it reminds me of what I learned, and then that helps me. So I care more about the covers I keep out, because I have a bunch of books, but I only keep out like a certain set of covers, and when I look at them, I remember things from them.
Nice. So, yeah, I like your bookshelves there. My apartment is tiny, but I have like a stacked bookshelf just behind me. It's like a vertical thing. Yeah, I have a lot of books too.
Yes, I like learning, and I like even more putting things into action. And so like I'll learn 100 things, but maybe one or two will stick with me, and that just seems to be the process of how life goes.
Yeah, it's the important thing, or at least what's most relevant to you at that time, that is sticking with you for a reason. So, yeah.